So welcome to the Active Transportation as an Economic Driver in Fast-Growing Utah session. We've got some excellent speakers today talking about economic implications of active transportation planning and projects in their own communities. And we've got a great cross-section of presenters today from different phases of development with our active transportation systems. I'm just going to get the slideshow started here. And if I could get a thumbs up from somebody saying that they can see the slide deck. Thanks, Sean. Excellent. And I'm going to open up the chat window here as well, just to make sure we're all ready. So we're going to start out by, I guess, really quick, just going over a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, we want to thank our summit partners and sponsors. You can see on this slide here, and I won't name all of them, but we've got some great sponsors today. A little bit of housekeeping is we're going to actually field all the questions for the session at the end. So each speaker will take about 15 minutes to present, and please feel free to use the chat to put any of your questions in, and we'll try to get to those questions at the end in the order they're received. We're going to start out first. I'm going to introduce each of these presenters in the order that they're going to be speaking. So the first speaker is going to be Jared Stewart. He's the Economic Development Coordinator with Tooele City, focuses on small business success programs, corporate recruitment, and grant writing. And since 2020, Jared has helped bring in over $1.3 million in new revenue to Tooele City, basically via grants for sidewalks, new trails, and workforce training programs. Julia Collins is Transportation Planning Manager at Park City with over 14 years of experience in the transportation industry, and she is responsible for executing multimodal projects, policies, and plans. And Sean Milne, our third speaker, is the Cache Valley Regional Economic Development Director. He's a former county commissioner of Tooele County. He always says that he's a recovering politician, so happy to have him here. We welcome you, Sean, right, as a recovering politician, and a former chairman of the Utah State Association of County Commissions and Councils. We're very fortunate to have these speakers today. We'll start out with Jared, and I'm going to allow you guys to just kind of run with your sections. Let me know if you have any questions. Again, for the attendees, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. Jared, Sean, and Julia, if you wouldn't mind, if you're comfortable with it, go ahead and put your contact information in the chat. And then at the end of the session, if we don't get to someone's question, they can already have your contact information available and they can contact you directly. So Jared, with that, we'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
All right, thanks so much, Zach. We'll go to the next slide here. I just want to talk quickly, in the last session, the presenter got into the chat and asked some questions. I want to start with a little question. We are all starting in different places with our trails and our economies and our communities. I would like to just kind of do a little poll in the chat for participants here. Tell us where you're at. Do you have trails? Do you have no trails? Do you have one trails? Do you just have a few? And what are you hoping for? Do you need more trails? Is that what you're looking for? Just throw some responses in the chat, because I just would love to get to know you a little bit as we get started, in recognition that we're all in different places here. Just want to, kind of see where everyone is. Okay, so we've got paved trails, right? And then also, what does your trail system look like? Is it, an urban paved system? Or are you hoping for, to learn about more recreational trails, off-road? This is good. So yeah, west side of, it sounds like Salt Lake Valley there. Lots of paved recreational trails, but not connecting where you want them to. more connecting trails. Trails that the family can use. I love that. That's great. Walking, biking, ATV, horses. There's a lot of different uses for trails, right? I think that's clear. Go Tooele. There we go. I like seeing that. Okay. Yeah, and keep throwing those in. I just would love to read those as we go through and just learn where each of you are at. So I want to start and begin telling you a little bit where Tooele is, right? Because we're in a different place than Park City, we're in a different place than Cache County, and I think each of us will touch on where we're at, and hopefully that becomes relevant to you as you are listening here, and you can glean something from each of us. So, Tooele is at the beginning, I would say, of paved like multi-use trails in the city, right? And trails that connect to the city. I mean, there's a lot of trails in Tooele for, in Tooele County as a whole, we have a lot, but we are at the beginning of, like, think your Jordan River Parkway kind of trail, right? So I think, but right now, as I've come into Tooele, we have, elected officials who are interested in trails, that understand the quality of life implications. We have staff that's the same, that are interested in trails and understand the value of those. And importantly, we have community members who express interest in trails and want to participate in the creation of trails. Let's go next slide, Zach. Thank you. So currently we've got a project that I want to kind of highlight, and this is, we call it our England Acres Trail. We've got a park right here kind of in the middle of this map. That is the England Acres Park that is being developed, right, and is growing, and is going to be a wonderful asset to the community. This red line is a trail that we are implementing and hopefully will construct this summer in Tooele City, and it will be the first, paved multi-use walk bike type of trail within city limits, right? And I want to highlight the connections, right? It connects to this Smelter Road, which is kind of a trail, a great place for people to ride their bikes up the road or walk. And then in the future, it's going to connect to an additional portion of trail as this area develops with housing, right? And how did we kind of get here, right? We're starting to build this trail now, but it's been a little bit of a journey to get here. We had to acquire some of this property through a sheriff's sale. We had some of the property deeded to us by a developer who's building homes now and kind of caught the vision of that. And then the other portion is in the park, is in the city parks. We already kind of had owned that. So it took a while to kind of bring all of these things together. And it can take a while, right? But I think you start where you're at and move forward. So let's go to the next slide. I want to talk about calculating the benefit and the economic benefit of trails, right? There's so much to be said for this. $1 spent on trails is $2.94 saved on medical expenses. And that really comes when you have your mental health benefits, you have your health benefits. People are getting out, they are healthier, they're spending less at doctor's visits, they are just spending less generally on medical expenses. And at the end of this, I will send a link in the chat to this slide deck so you can actually go in and click on these links. I want everybody to be able to have those too. There are more jobs created through the construction of trails than any other transportation construction project. And I love that statistic. You create more jobs building trails on a per dollar spent than you do through, building new roads. And I think that is significant. I know we spend more on roads than we do on trails, right? But there's, a per dollar spent. I think it's important to note that. Improved property values, right? Closer the property is to a trail, the more, the higher your property value will be. For us city folk, we're thinking property taxes and the revenue that comes through those, which is important to municipal budgets. So, and with our England Acres Trail here, I calculated that it could have overall to the city an increase in property values of $800,000, right? And that then trickles down into new sales, new property tax benefits and spending, right? If you are on a bike or if you are walking, you end up shopping at places that are, if there's retail and shops near those trails and sidewalks and other AT infrastructure, you end up buying locally. And that's probably because, if like I need something on my way home, right? If I'm riding my bike home, I'm going to go to this shop on the way home. Probably am not going to stop at Walmart on the way home and because I don't have as much capacity. It's interesting in this study that's linked, it talks about more frequent visits to stores and less spending per visit, but more visits overall does equate to more spending. Thanks, Zach. Let's go to the next slide. So, I just want to highlight that there's people all around you in your community who are interested in recreation, are interested in new trails, and are interested in getting out. This is a photo of the annual Tooele City Triathlon that the city hosts, right? And you get all sorts of people coming out to participate in that. And it's just a kind of a testament to how many people there are in the community that are interested in participating. In Tooele, I found as I started working here over a year and a half ago, going towards 2 years, that our parks director was really interested, and the county parks director. There's a county trails committee too, elected officials. There's a neighborhood association and a group that calls themselves the Friends of England Acre Park, right? And they gave us a lot of input on this trail. High school mountain biking teams, the health department. Property owners, right, who see a vision, right, and developers as they build, they want to share with us, the property to be able to build the trail. And as we get into grants on the next slide, we will talk about how each of those participants could write a letter of support, right? So as I kind of finish here, I want to really highlight all the opportunities that there are, right? And these are each linked to a website where you can go and see grant deadlines and hopefully bring some of these funds into your communities. Right now, I think is a day and age of stretched budgets, right? Everyone's seeing the impacts of inflation, both personally, individually, in your families, but also at municipal and business budgets, right? I think the costs of creating new trails are going up, but also just of everything, right? So it's never been more important than it is right now to bring new funding to your community through grants, right? The Utah Outdoor Recreation Grant, that is one of the biggest tools that we are using to create this grant, to create this trail, sorry. And really, we received $150,000 for this trail just from that grant. That's a huge milestone and really stretches our tax funds that we're using to build this trail. The State Parks Recreational Trails Program, right? This one is a little trickier because it really comes from federal funding, so there's a little more hoops to go through. That's always something you end up having to watch when you're looking at grants. Is okay, is it coming from a county, a city? Is it coming from the state? Those two categories are a little easier to work with funding sometimes. If we're honest, sometimes those federal dollars get a little tricky because you have to spend a little more to get to meet all the requirements, which is okay, right? It's still bringing new funds into the community. UDOT has some programs. The Transportation Alternatives Program, they awarded us $100,000 for this trail and park improvement project. So between those three, that's $300,000 that we were able to bring into Tooele City's budget that wasn't there before, and now we can use on this trail. Other options, right, that you can use for not just trails, but also sidewalks. Many communities have enacted a local option sales tax that's administered through a council of governments. And there's a link to the state code that kind of elaborates on the allowable uses of those. You can use those for sidewalks, right? You can use those for trails. You can use them for all types of transportation improvements. And often if there's someone to advocate in those meetings for the use of those funds for, active transportation, that's when it can happen, right? Otherwise it could just all go to roads, which sometimes is needed too, right? AARP, they have a community challenge grant. You could, put benches in all your parks with that grant, things like that to really make it a better place for people to age and to spend their time. And then UDOT also has safe sidewalk programs, which we've found to be very successful in filling sidewalk gaps, right? And that's important. Tooele City has been around for a while. We were established in 1853. And we've got some old sidewalks in some areas that don't have sidewalks, right? They were kind of built before that was, required. So there's sidewalk gaps, and those UDOT programs are wonderful to help fill some of those gaps. And then lastly, look at wherever you are participating from. Your county, your city might have a tourism fund or a recreation fund, and someone that you can talk to and look to kind of see what you can do locally with some locally leveraged funding in your community. And with that, I just want to kind of encourage everybody to just start where they're at and build a coalition, build a group of people around you that you can work with on trails and catch the vision together. And I'll turn it next to Julia, I think.
Thanks, Jared. And hello, and thanks to everyone and the Move Utah team for the opportunity to be here virtually today. So let's see, everyone knows Park City, right? Either from a skiing or a hiking adventure, coming to the Sundance Film Festival, or maybe you're a total transportation geek like myself and came up for a ride on our free electric buses or our e-bike share program. Next slide. But we have been very successful over the years with, if you go to the next slide, Zach. There we go, perfect. We've been very successful over the years with developing our active transportation network from both a recreation and transportation standpoint to support our thriving economy. But how did we get here? And in some ways, Park City is unique with our ski resorts, our ability to preserve open space, our resort sales tax options, and other unique funding opportunities. But in other ways, we are Tooele, 15 years grown up, or as we open the presentation, many of you are also struggling with a lot of these same issues. So I'm here to share a lot of transferable lessons learned that we have encountered and some of our projects that I think are applicable to any city across the state. So I'm going to build on Jared's quality points, and here's some of the framework for what I'll share with you. This includes why plans and developing your trails and active transportation blueprints are extremely important for the foundation of your system. Building your community champions and how to engage them and develop a culture of this. Applying for grants and funding is how you make your projects happen. And, this sounds silly, but we had this motto over the past 2 years of how certain projects can be low cost and just paint, but they can make a large economic and safety impact. And then lastly, certain challenges and needs that I think every city or agency is going to struggle with. So next. Just some quick context on Park City. We have 18 miles of paved pathways and over 180 miles of soft surface. And when we combine that with Summit County, the total network is just under 50 miles of paved trails and over 350 miles of dirt. And everyone thinks of Park City as a summer and winter recreation area with the resorts and the events. But I want to share with you that our sidewalks, our ease of walking around our community, the sense of safety, the access these facilities give to transit also really helps our successful economy too. In the winter, we have facets of our main street that see higher use of pedestrians than summer use. And giving our visitors a place to enjoy and access our commercial districts by foot from resorts, commercial, and residential areas really helps with that, along with having solid walking and biking facilities around transit. It connects our workforce to their jobs, along with some quality snow plowing. So next. Plans are your blueprints. They laid the foundation for projects, community support, and grants. An example of this is in 2006, a group of citizens approached the city and said, we want to walk more. We want our kids to feel safe walking to school. We want our community to benefit. This is part of our culture, and we're willing to pay for it. And so this started a bikeable and walkable neighborhood study, which outlined a whole list of capital projects and ended in a $15 million voter approved bond to cover 43 projects for walking and biking all over the city, and really built our backbone and our spine of the system. So when you have clear community goals identified in these plans, you build your champions, you get your community support, and it's much easier to then move into the next stages of funding and the project to move forward. Next slide. So a couple examples of this, the Summit Bike Share program. In partnership with Summit County, we conducted a feasibility study for an electric bike share program where the stations would go relative to the network. And this enabled us to outline the costs and then be part of the UTA federal Tiger discretionary award, and ultimately develop a 20 station, 200 bikes to complete our system. And e-bikes, just a side note, make a lot of sense in Park City with our steep grades, our altitude. We have longer distances between stations and destinations, and our visitation. Next slide. Another example of how plans are really important. We built a net zero pedestrian tunnel by removing an at-grade pedestrian signal, aka a hawk, that was connecting a school campus on a state gateway corridor. And the planning here was multifaceted, but one element is we quantified the amount of traffic delay from that pedestrian signal through a cost-benefit analysis of lost value of time to the consumer that was stuck in traffic in their car for spending productivity using an average median household income. And then we did a delay per year to find an annual value, and then ultimately a 20-year value of $880,000. And then we also added a monetary value for a safety benefit as well, being close to a school. And while this was not the full cost of the tunnel, we were able to show that there was a significant economic benefit to adding this amenity, a safety benefit and a community benefit for adding this amenity to our community. Next slide. So if you can engage your community early and often, we have multiple touch points with many stakeholders, but the school district and the children is a really easy win and relatively inexpensive. I think it was Liz Joy yesterday. She mentioned how the physical activity was really high in Park City. One element is that we start them young with activities and education. The main elementary school has over 60% of the kids walk or bike to school. And the city, we partner with Business Chamber, local businesses, our Trails Foundations, the school district, and more to throw events throughout the year for education and awareness and safety, like a Bike to School Day. We also had the Bike Utah Best program, which is incredible, and the Move Utah educators, and more statewide partners come and help with these events and education. And they're just low budget programs, leveraging bike stops and PTAs and teachers. And the image on the right, we actually had one of the local bike mechanics lead a bike safety workshop. And, I think it cost us maybe $100. We pitched in some lights and went from there. So next slide. And there's so many grant opportunities. I know Jared highlighted them in great detail in other sessions as well. I'm really impressed and grateful for the support at the state level from the outdoor recreation grants and the UDOT TIF grants that are becoming available, and just in much larger amounts. They're making things possible. But these applications require data, and data collection and counters can seem daunting and expensive. But even if you can make one day, one shot in time for an AM and PM 1 hour manual counts, get out there with your clipboard, it's really worth it to add that data, because it can show your use and your impact that these projects can make, especially in those applications. Next slide. A few great programs that Park City has established that can either increase your active transportation access to businesses, help employees, or expand a user. This one is a request a rack program. We bought 10 racks at $1,000, and businesses apply and say they want them, and it's relatively low cost. They get to provide the space, and we just do the install. And I think we added about 78 new bike parking spaces just in the past year. Next slide. We've done some demonstration projects where we've enhanced sidewalks, and this is a crosswalk for business accesses and makes the street more walkable and provides some moderate traffic calming. So back to that safe access to businesses and helping users. And this is part of our neighborhood traffic management program. So you can see the before and the after, and this was less than $200 or $300. Next slide. This project, we've partnered with UDOT, the state, to repurpose some unused center median right-of-way on SR 224, a heavily trafficked bike area where we see a lot of bikers going to and from a trail, a dirt trail, or road cyclists that are heading up a big mountain grind, or e-bikes because they can go faster right now and they're headed to Main Street or to the other commercial destinations. And you can see we didn't need to expand the footprint of the roadway. We just repurposed the pavement. And this project, we're hoping to tack on with another construction project and move to implementation soon. Next slide. So switching gears just a little bit, we all know this scene a little too well. In March of 2020, Main streets were dead. Things felt gloomy. And there was so much uncertainty that a biker rode right down the center of our main street. So next slide. All of our major capital projects were frozen. But we all learned that being outside and vacationing and spending money outside was a thing. We learned that very quickly. So Park City went a little extreme, but on Sundays, with the support of our business chamber, our local downtown business groups, we launched something called Car Free Sundays and reimagined Main Street. It was closed to cars and only foot and horse traffic were allowed. Then, all the shops, the restaurants, everything was moved out into the street. And this was really dynamic. It supported our local businesses. It created community gathering spaces. It improved visitation. And I love this picture. Main Street was just really active in a brand new way. Next slide. We also, 2 years ago, in close collaboration with our engineering and public works department, completed a few projects in that it's just paint. Let's create safe pedestrian walkways and safe access points on roads going to our main street, because people were, our numbers of people walking and biking were tripling. And of course, we had a little Park City flair with those paw prints, but paint is cheap and it really goes a long way. Next slide. Here's another example. We tightened up this intersection, and a little bit farther up where this picture, we created an advisory shoulder on one side to allow for a protected bike and pedestrian area between the Main Street and commercial district. And we have that paint machine in house. I can't remember, but it's a couple $1,000s. And then our paint is 14 cents a linear foot, and you just have to keep on top of it with maintenance. So everything is cheap and experimental, and it can really make a large impact in safety and access. And next slide. Now some challenges and some things we're still working on is the increase in trail and pathway usage that we've seen in the past 2 years. The stress and demand on our trail amenities have been unprecedented. And while this is wonderful in some ways, it's also, we've witnessed a complete change in parking demand at trailheads, where cars are now spilling into unsafe areas or no parking areas. And I put this picture up here, but it kind of makes a joke a little bit, just the amount of doggy poop bags and the demand on our doggy poop bags, and what that did for overflowing our trash bins, because previously we were only picking up trash bins 2 days a week. And so this is an operations and parking issue that we responded to. But the takeaway is that your demand can completely change and you're totally unprepared, and you have to be flexible and find some extra funding, get creative, and be as nimble as you possibly can. Next and last slide. 2 more challenges to navigate And something I think is not unique to Park City is proper budgeting for ongoing maintenance. It's tough, it's hard to do. How many times is that light going to go out or that graffiti going to occur? It's hard to predict that. It is becoming easier to find grants to pay for the capital investment, but then what? A city or entity is responsible for that ongoing maintenance, and how do you factor that in? So Park City's approach is when the capital project is allotted for in the city's budget, the Public Works Maintenance Department reviews the amenity, the life cycle of it, and assesses an annual maintenance cost for the total life cycle of the improvement. And then this is tacked onto the project for the budget approval. And this can grow the project immensely, but at least we're having it in the conversation now, and we didn't previously. And then the last item to consider is, this is hard. It's really hard to get more FTEs. But if you can devote staff to this important work, it will pay off. In smaller communities, it can be challenging because we all wear multiple hats and do so many roles. But if there's an option to justify that having more staff to write grants, develop events, or make the event, improve the event in some way, and it'll have an economic impact to justify the expenditure. And it is really worth it. So I invite you to come up to Park City and just see. And with that, I'll hand it over to Sean. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Julia. Excellent presentations. So my name is Sean Milne. I currently work for Cache County, but I've lived elsewhere before. And one of those locales is Tooele City. So I'm going to ask my friend Jared Stewart if he would do a little something for me to give cues to me. I know that it is it's just not coincidental, Jared, that they put me last out of the three of us panelists, because as a recovering politician, we can go on too long when we've got the microphone. I'd like to ask you if you'll keep me on task with the timing. Do you think you can be up for that?
You bet, Sean. Happy to do it.
Okay,
I'll just start screaming at you if you go too long.
Excellent. Yeah, you have something to communicate with Zach that I need to wrap it up. Zach, next slide, please. So as stated, Sean Milne, and one of those other communities that I lived in Tooele County, in Tooele City specifically is where I lived, but I'd been on planning and zoning. I'd been on city council and county commission. And what I know to be absolutely true is that the status quo of the way we build out our communities is really, really expensive. And so I've taken a little bit of a different tack to today's presentation for my portion. And at the end, I'm definitely going to highlight a couple of very 30,000 foot view things here in Cache and Logan. But I really want to dominantly talk about what we all as planners probably already take for granted, but assuming that there are maybe some elected officials that are joining us today, and maybe some talking points that you as planners or economic development folks can take back to your elected officials to maybe reframe the conversation and know that it is going to be a slog. It's going to be a long conversation that you'll have with them over time. But anyway, so over to the next slide that says perspective is everything. Oh, sorry, Zach, back up. Thanks. Some rhetorical questions for you. I love how Jared started his out. And while you're thinking of these, I'm going to give a couple of shout outs. But, if you've been in Utah your entire life, I'm talking about you when I say locals, what do you love about living where you live, right? Like just envision it, because it'll probably be different for those in Washington County as it is up here in Cache. The answers may be the same, but the landscape and the environment, socio and culturally environment, as much as the landscape, physical environment, may conjure up something different for you. But if you're a transplant like me, I spent some time growing up in another state during my formative years of elementary through high school, living in Salt Lake County for a while. Like I noted, I've lived in Tooele Valley recently, and now up here in Cache. Every place has something different, but what do you love about it that makes you think, this is where I'm at now and I love it, and I wouldn't think about possibly moving away. So rhetorically, while you're thinking about that, I got to give a shout out to some other Tooele folks that I saw were on the call today. Marisa Manzione is on Tooele City Council and has been a dear friend for a lot of years. And Amy Bate, I saw Hillary Bryan there for a moment, though I don't know where she's at these years. And Sissy Morton is a really great friend. So next slide. Thanks for letting me have an opportunity to say hi to all of them. In economic development terms, we typically think of, the Utah way. I've heard Governor Herbert use this a lot, and Governor Cox has also used this term about the Utah way and its collaboration. The previous two panelists, Jared and Julia, have already noted that, and I'd certainly advocate for it as well, that we do things a little bit differently here, and that's to our betterment. Some of it too is we have a lower population density for the time being, but as the world and certainly the nation has found out about us, you likely know that last year, for the first time in about 20 years, we had the proportionality of how much of Utah's growth year over year was external. 59% of Utah's growth last year was from outside the state, but typically it is about 2/3 are our own kids and grandkids. Well, for the moment, that means we have fresher air, certainly more fresh than Southern California, where I grew up for a period of time. We clearly have a lot of open spaces, if not dominantly because we're 2/3 owned by the federal government and it's not really developable. And what that means is we have some relatively quick commutes. It was not uncommon for my youth kind of experience in Southern California to talk about hours of travel versus miles, and it was a sad kind of experience that to economic development terms, those lengthy commutes mean lost productivity, but I'll discuss that a little bit further too. And then of course there's the safety. We have a lot of relative safety, and that matters to active transportation, not just because of driver visibility with pedestrians and cyclists, but also one's propensity to be a pedestrian or bicyclist on trails and not feel like there's an overt threat of mugging, right? Like many people, when they think about the 5 boroughs in New York, might think about, well, depending upon the unsavory neighborhood I might be in, how safe is that? And then there's obviously a correlation to one's propensity to be outside of the steel box of a car. Next slide. I kind of already mentioned this as well as Zach's introduction. So I come at today's perspective here of the status quo is really, really expensive, because as a budget officer at the city council and county commission level, I know how incredibly expensive those roads are. And Jared alluded to that as well. Pavement, whether it's in the form of concrete, which is that much more expensive, or asphalt, it's great when you're a city or county commissioner, and as an official, you have a new residential development turned over to you, and it's got a nice, beautiful paved road and set of roads throughout the neighborhood. Okay, fantastic. You don't really give much thought about, needing in 20 years from now to possibly put another 1.25 or 3/4 inch asphalt on top of that, and what that cost might be down the road. And then you certainly think to yourself, well, if they've got an HOA, they'll pay for it. But what I want us to think about through this is Utah's rampant growth now is a ticking time bomb for budget officers down the road. And you may think you get to punt this to somebody who will succeed you, but if you're a good steward of your community's budget and culture now, you will make it easier for those that replace you later, whether it's of your own volition or you're voted out of office. But you should be thinking about your community's economic prosperity for building your environment now for what you want it to be in the future. Next slide, please. And while I've already mentioned the roads are expensive, Jared mentioned this too, public health is expensive. And at least at the county level, we have a lot of social services that we offer that are different than my experience at the city, where you expect that the counties and the state will take on certain modalities of paying for social costs of public health. Next slide. So certainly with that county experience, I clued into what Jared said. For every $1 you put into active transportation projects, you save $3 roughly in ongoing medical expenses. Now I'm a middle-aged pudgy guy, so I am the pot calling the kettle black, and I'm both the pot and the kettle. I love my single-use, single occupancy vehicle, as Alan Matheson called it in just the previous presentation about the Point. But what I love about the Point is it's very purpose-driven with active transportation in mind at its root, right? They are incenting upon the very design They're incenting pedestrian and bicyclist use in the core of that development. And I think it's a really intriguing opportunity to finally shift some of the costs to vehicle users that are necessitating jurisdictional costs. So here I am, admittedly somebody who loves my F-150. She's 20 years old. She's high mileage. She's probably not the best for air quality, but I love her because, you know, she's mine and she's paid for, but I'm the only one who's driving and commuting in that every day. Shame on me, because here I am giving a presentation for this, but also shame on a societal paradigm and municipal budgets all too often give away parking for free and incentivize the vehicle use. When what I think the Point is doing well and building up, as well as this picture here, where they've got some density. Now it's a little bland because they don't have any adult trees in this picture, but this is pretty ubiquitous throughout the Wasatch Front of tightly developed neighborhoods. Hopefully that ends up being a pocket park there in the middle where that rubble is from the construction debris as they continue their build out. Otherwise, this is exactly the quality of life that I rhetorically asked about earlier, and say, you know, what do you envision that you love about it, and what do you want us to continue to keep and retain as qualities that make Utah, Utah, and not Southern California, where I spent my childhood years, or any other place as we grow up. Next slide. Kind of building upon that last one, you know, we're used to sprawling. And again, I suspect that I'm speaking to a lot of planner type folks by your profession. And so I'm probably preaching to the choir. So for the minority that might be with us today that are responsible for planning and zoning and general plan updates and are really the elected leaders of a community, I hope they listen that we can continue to have challenges, because I don't want to understate just how challenging it is. If you're an elected official, you never run for office thinking, gosh, by the time I'm done, I hope 51% of my neighbors hate me. So you want to be responsive to what, you know, locals currently in your community tell you they want, but at the same time building for what they also might say in a different sentence that they want are affordable places for the kids to grow up, shorter commutes, less congestion on the roads, better air quality. And how do we get that? It's not oftentimes the way we're currently building in the status quo now that will get us the future that people will say that they want. And so it becomes an elected leader's job, instead of just planners in those public comment periods, to give a presentation for a new rezone, to educate the populace through cottage meetings or townhome meetings, or you know whatever news media there might be within a community, newsletters that go out from the local municipality to their voters. But it's really expensive. Sprawl just means that you're going to have more linear miles of infrastructure. And here today, we're talking dominantly about roads. If I've got 50 driveways residentially that connect to a linear mile of country lane, 2-lane road, to use Julia's phrase, there's not a lot of paint on it. Maybe there's some dash lines down the middle. Maybe there's a fog line. But for many 2-lane country roads, we love the rural aspect and we love the low population density. But as our population continues to grow, how realistic is that trend? If I have 150 or 250 homes that have residential driveways on the same linear mile, that's roughly $1.4 million is a quote that I've used for the last couple of years for a linear mile of 2-lane asphalt road, okay? The cost per household for 50 is certainly a lot higher than for 150 or 250. But here's a little question to flip the script that again, speaking to planners, maybe a different way to speak to your elected officials, for those elected officials that might be with us today. Maybe you don't build a linear mile of road because you don't need connectivity on both ends, but you cluster some of those 150 homes on a portion of an overall hundreds of acres of development, and you save your costs over time to maintain and rebuild that linear mile road in the way that we think about it today. All right, next slide. So in build to suit, I I come back to what I said a moment ago. We need to be more purposeful in building the future that we want right now, even though we might think, well, you know what, that's 20 years down the road before our local populace will be faced with these challenges. But that's an opportunistic way to think, but it's overall a very expensive way that you're going to encounter reality for your community. I totally understand as a recovering politician how politically expedient that is to just build what people say that they're familiar with in their neighborhood now, which is predominantly suburban sprawl. But to challenge you that if you really want to keep your taxes low in the future, you're going to have to think about building differently and planning now for that build out. Next slide. So along the lines of that, you know, if you envision downtown Salt Lake or Sugar House, where they're currently already dense and densely populated, they're already built out. They don't really have room to expand their municipal boundaries for new residential growth. Of course, they need to build upwards, right? You think about wherever you might be. It might be a city of 30,000 people today. What does the annexation plan look like? How landlocked are you going to be? If it doesn't make sense to have a Walmart with 3 stories of residences above that, immediately above that, then how do you ensure that you still maintain some growth for your children and grandchildren to coexist in the future in the very community where they grew up? Keeping your seniors, again, within the community that they grew up with, some mix of inventory that might have density where there's shorter commutes, where, you know, someone doesn't necessarily have to be 92 years old getting behind the wheel of a vehicle for long commutes that they might be challenged to do, or whatever the build out might look like. If you're going to be constrained in the future, you can't, you know, UDOT can't buy a right of way for those skyscrapers downtown. It's the biggest kind of extreme example I can give, but they just can't widen that road anymore, whether it be State Street or First East or First West, Broadway or the like. So think about how to purposefully build in protected pedestrian and bicycling routes now to save costs over time. All right, next slide. I see that Jared has left, and I know I'm coming down to the wire here on my slides, but my Q man has left me. All right, so I've already noted the congestion is expensive. Yeah, Jared, I called you out, buddy. Poor planning. Again, I just mentioned the right of way. Disruption of utilities. I remember when Trax was going in and the bookstore, the famous bookstore, I want to say Sam Walton, but maybe I'm wrong. Whenever you try to increase capacity or non-vehicular use of commutership patterns for those that need to get to work and then to get home, you know, you just think of the added cost to a society for the disruption of utility service, the disruption of business access to consumers. Yes, thank you, Lanny. I appreciate that, Sam Weller Bookstore. And then, of course, you know, some ruined aesthetics. If we plan our communities now for pedestrian and bicycling friendly or active transportation friendly environments now, you don't have to kill the trees that are adult and beautiful and part of the character of an area to widen a road in order to add, you know, or lane restrict and slow some speed limits and add some pedestrian friendly areas later. So again, just something to think about. Next slide. So again, I'm just going to reinforce, if we do it right up front, as opposed to having to go back and tear things up later and reinvent the wheel, we can keep our taxes low. We can have better health. This matters to me because in my current role as an economic development director, I want to keep taxes low because it's one of the strategic advantages that Utah and Cache County specifically has in our wheelhouse to sell our community as to why existing businesses should stay and remain as they expand. And folks that want to come and build something west of the Mississippi to expand their business model, if I want them to come here and right now my taxes are low, I don't want there to be a natural thought that because our population grows in Utah and we strain our resources, we must increase taxes. I lose the very tax advantage that I have right now. The current businesses are going to be asked to pay for more to create a better quality of life that, quite candidly, existing businesses are the ones that help create the quality of life that attracts the new businesses and the new employees. So it seems like it's a bit of a penalty to turn around and ask them to pay more in the future because we weren't good planners up front. Next slide. This is my obligatory tip of the hat. Carly Lanch is on, and I noticed that she had made a comment somewhere in the chat before I got started. She's fantastic. And if you don't have a Carly, well, first of all, you can't have ours, but you ought to go get yourself one. Or someone like Julia that's talked about, you know, what she's been able to do for Park City, or Jared. She's been absolutely fantastic. She and I have a bit of a unique role versus my experience in Tooele, in that the county has several positions where we lend ourselves out departmentally or by discipline to other municipalities. Cache Valley has 19 different incorporated municipalities, whether they be towns or cities like Logan or Providence, Hyde Park, or the like. And so what I've already heard several of you mention, whether it was Jared and Julia as part of their presentation or the comments while they were giving theirs, is this desire to have interconnectivity. Carly does a fantastic job of not only some of those assets that are in the canyons that I think of as recreational, right? I mean, I understand for the premise that it's active transportation, but when I think of it in terms of either my elected role before or economic development now, active transportation is how can I get folks actively transporting themselves to and from work or shopping centers, not necessarily the weekend recreation up a canyon, though Cache County does an excellent job of that. And Carly and her work with municipalities in the area are doing a great job as we are now struggling with the build out and fast-paced growth here in Cache Valley that might change our character. As you can see there, there's a paved path. It's right in the middle of Logan. We do have a bit of an advantage because these riparian areas that sadly Tooele doesn't have a lot of surface water, so they don't have these riparian areas. There's naturally already a buffer that homes and businesses didn't just build right up to the edge of the waterway. And so there's this interconnectivity, next slide, that enables folks to functionally actually be able to use these pathways from residential areas to commercial centers and places of employment. Again, as elected officials, I would hope any of us that are with it will negotiate. Should you ever have leverage to use economic incentives with a commercial center, negotiate with them that in exchange for whatever those incentives might be, perhaps you might be willing to give more incentive percentage or other kind of sweeteners to a deal to make sure that they incorporate as part of their development interconnectivity to a trail system. It does not just have to be one of those parks and recs only kind of advantages. Though you see Park to Park here in Logan, they do a great job where parking lots already exist for commuters to perhaps get to and finish their last mile along a trailway and be active to get to their commercial centers. And with that, I'll wrap up. Thank you very much.
All right, excellent. Thank you, speakers, for your excellent presentations and your insight. I'm going to ask, I'm dying to ask one question, but there's one question in the chat I want to get to that's for Julia from Stephanie. What can I use as precedents to show that the use of paint is effective, safe, and affordable?
That is a really hard question. And I put a couple links in the chat to some resources on how you could do tactical urbanism. And I also saw that Austin Taylor, a previous Park City employee, offered being a resource as well. You know, it's not just going to be one area there. We worked hard on that motto of it's just paint. I think we're all pretty familiar with MUTCD guidelines and other engineering design resources. And you know, it's just paint motto doesn't always fit within that. So, you know, we worked hard on the, you can always scrub the road, remove it, the paint will fade. This is a pilot project. You know, Austin worked hard on this kind of neighborhood tactical urbanism where residents would come to us and they request projects. And then we work with them on what the city and the city engineer and what we're going to feel comfortable with. So in short, it's iterations and it's also very project specific. But I think there's a lot of great resources out there and, you know, we're available as well to talk more about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Julia. And I think we've got Jared's and Sean's contact info in the chat, and Julia, if you wouldn't mind putting yours in there, that'd be excellent. The question I'm kind of just really interested to ask you three, and we'll just, if you could respond in order of when you presented, Jared first, then Julia, then Sean, is how do you think not having active transportation facilities or trails would impact your local economy and or community?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Zach. And I think without them, we are less healthy, less happy, less connected people, right? I think that's kind of what it comes down to in my mind. And having them adds so much economically, but you know, beyond that too, in terms of community.
Yeah, I just ditto on that. I think the trails, the access to the outdoors, and the ability to be walkable, that was really kind of the momentum in that 2006 effort in Park City. And that has really encompassed kind of the lifeline of what makes Park City Park City. And then, of course, the economic driver as well. People come to our city because they want to access recreation, or they want to walk around Main Street and then spend money. Or, you know, again, I mentioned our workforce, you know, they have to access transit. And so to get there, they have to be able to walk to and from their destination with their transit. So active transportation is everything in our community to create our thriving economy.
Okay, I'm going to jump back in and also say, if you don't have trails, people might not stay, right? People who grow up there will want to move somewhere that does have trails, or people that are moving somewhere will go, you know, somewhere that does have those resources.
Because I know time is tight, I'm going to say a big ditto and then see if this cuts me off as I say, you know, I think you need only look to Park City, Ogden, Moab, St. George to see communities where at different times in their past, they were not knowing as being pedestrian friendly, and they didn't feel like they had much of an outdoor life in that urbanized kind of core. And they've shown that over sustained pressure over a long period of time, you can totally change a culture. And as we all know in business, you know, culture will eat your business plan for lunch. You can make the best made plans, but if you don't execute it, and to this point, I'm just going to reinforce, your politicians can talk a really good game about how this is really important, but if it's not in the budget, they don't really care. Because budgets, it doesn't matter whether it's a household, a business, or a municipal entity, budgets will tell you everything about that culture's prioritization. And Ogden has proven that if you build an outdoor rec component to your economic development cluster, people will move there because of that. And if you are disjointed between what you're selling and what you actually have to provide, you're not going to be successful in getting that cluster. And again, Park City, Moab, and others are just proof of that concept.
If I could add one more thing to that, John, I would add policies. So budget and policy. And way back when, much smarter people at the time put an open space requirement in Park City of over 30% for developments. And there was a big trail component to that. And that has driven so many things within our city as a result.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, speakers. You did a great job. We appreciate your insights, and all the attendees, we appreciate your participation as well. And enjoy the rest of the conference.